Today we're going to take a look at Iran, which is by far the most unique of the countries that we're taking a look at. Their constitution was drafted in 1989. Does something very similar that we saw with other constitutions, and that it creates a more democratic looking system with elected government who are positioned alongside the religious leaders, as we will see, are the real power holders in Iran. It also gives the supreme leader, who we'll be learning about, vast powers. Iran is an illiberal democracy, is the best way to call it. They are authoritarian, but they do have democratic-looking institutions. They are an oligarchy. In this case, the rule by a few pertains to the ulema, or the scholars who are expert in Sharia law. They are the world's only theocracy, ruled by God, or better put, ruled by religion. And its ideology is in many ways fascist. Islamofascism is what a lot of people will say, in that they tend to uphold themselves higher than everybody else, and inferior elements, various types of people, whether it be religion or ethnicity or something like that, will be either frowned upon, persecuted, or even eliminated. So they do have a very high degree of nationalism. They're a country that's never been colonized, and then also a high degree of statism and a lack of liberties as well. Iran is a true rentier state, meaning its economy is completely dependent on oil for its major revenues, and so they do suffer from the resource curse, but they are our best example of the rentier economy. Legitimacy is always an issue in Iran. Internal legitimacy is dropping because, very similar to what we saw with other authoritarian countries, the younger generation doesn't look back as kindly and as fondly to some of the big revolutionary moments. And so they are definitely clinging more to Western ideas, which is creating some instability. But with that said, aside from a couple of uprisings and violence that broke out after some elections are still experiencing high turnout, and legitimacy is remaining intact at this point. Externally, Iran is our best example of a state that is kind of closed off from the rest of the world. Now, this has changed recently, but very limited investment from other countries. They are kind of isolated. They've isolated themselves even within the Muslim world. And a lot of it is due to the fears of their nuclear proliferation, and it goes back to religion and old grudges. And so they are definitely unique amongst our countries when you ask the questions about legitimacy and stability. So when we look at executives, the first person we need to mention is the supreme leader, who holds the highest authority in Iran. They are the synthesizer of religious and secular law. They are basically the most powerful person in Iran. You might even say a dictator, but we'll go with the term oligarchy. The supreme leader is selected by the ulemas from amongst the assembly of experts, which is made up of 86 members. Khomeini, who was the originator of the Iranian Revolution, the first of the supreme leaders, coined the phrase the supreme interpreter, which means that, and you have to know something about the religious background here, the type of Islam that is practiced in Iran is called Twelver Shi'ism, and this refers to the 12th Imam, who is the true leader of Iran. But of course, he's not around right now, and so in the meantime, the leader kind of serves as the supreme interpreter until that time when the 12th Imam rises up once again. The leader also sets all policy, sets the agenda, makes the most important appointments also. Now, so you'll see him revered, but you'll also see him mostly playing from the background. However, he will move to the foreground and issue fatwas, which are edicts, mainly religious edicts. And so, for example, there's been some notable ones, like Khomeini decided it was okay to eat caviar. He's made rules about playing chess, listening to music, birth control TV. So you get all kinds of things that will come through straight from the supreme leader. Now, after the Constitution was drafted, they wanted to look more democratic, and so now we have an office of the president, who is the head of government. He has a 4-year term, must be a male, 12 or Shiite, and they're responsible for signing bills, appointing members to the cabinet, appointing provincial governors as well. They can be impeached by the parliament, and the leader may remove him. And so you can definitely see that this is someone who's not really in charge. But a lot of Iranian presidents in recent times have kind of been the face of the political element in Iran, when in reality the real power is behind the scenes with the supreme leader. The legislature is called the Majlis, and it has 290 members. All members are Muslim, except for 5 seats that are set aside from other religions. And this is just kind of a not so subtle attempt to make it seem like there's a competitive election system for seats in the parliament, but in reality it's not. They're just kind of for show. The Majlis can make laws, but they cannot make any law that contradicts with the Constitution or with Islam. And it's very weak because it's inferior to the religious bodies. And don't lose sight of what the Majlis is and always has been, which is a rubber stamp for what the religious leaders want to do. Now, parallel to the government's parliament is kind of the parliament of the religious order, which is the Council of Guardians. The members include 6 ulemas who are appointed by the leader and 6 Muslim lawyers appointed by the Majlis. And their main thing is to provide religious accountability on the Majlis. So any law that comes out of the Majlis has to be checked and verified that it's compliant with Sharia law by the Council of Guardians. Sometimes they'll come into conflict, in which case an expediency council is set up. But, when you look at it closely, you'll realize who they work for. The leader gets to appoint all the members of the expediency council. And so, therefore, the religious guys always win out in any kind of struggle. And so just think of the Majlis as the rubber stamp for the agenda that is being put through by the religious leaders. The presidential election is actually held on odd-numbered years, which is kind of unique. The first presidential election was held in 1989, and the winner was impeached and the successor killed. And so it was a rough start to the Democratic office of the president, or illiberal office, I should say. And then something happened. 1997 and 2001, a reformer named Mohammad Khatami shockingly won the elections. And for all throughout the 90s, Khatami was in power, and you didn't really hear quite as much from Iran because he was more of a moderate. He wasn't such a hardliner as many of the others in the religious order are. And so they made sure that wasn't going to happen again, they being the religious leaders along with the supreme leader. They didn't want a reformer. They wanted somebody that was firmly in their camp. And so they did all kinds of things to make sure that happened, vetted candidates, kind of rigged the system so that they would get somebody from that camp. And so that happened in 2005 when Mahmoud Ahmadinejad won the presidency, but although fraudulently, because they thought that the police were stuffing ballots. He would get reelected in 2009, and in the aftermath there were violent protests that all the world saw because it was one of the first times that social media was used in one of these violent global events for the whole world to see. And at that moment, Iran was actually in play for, say, the United States to do something about it, but they didn't. And so it all kind of settled down. It was put to rest, and Ahmadinejad carried out his second term. In 2013, Hassan Rouhani won the presidency, and he's also a hardliner, some people will say he was a little bit more of a moderate, but he's definitely in the camp of the supreme leader, and he won in the first round with 51% of the vote. Modulus elections, voters may vote for as many names as there are seats in the district. Candidates with over 50% of the votes are elected. If seats remain, then runners-up compete in a runoff. So basically they have a majority runoff system in the Majlis. To prevent reformist winners in both of these kinds of elections, candidates are vetted by the Guardian Council. This is the other big function that the Guardian Council serves. In addition to serving as a check on the legislation that comes out of the Majlis for compliance with Sharia law, they also vet all candidates and narrow them down to people that are going to be approved by the supreme leader and the rest of the religious leaders. With political parties, it's real simple in Iran. There is no political parties, but they do have factions. So like we said, the conservatives would be the ones who are aligned with the leader and the ulema and favor Sharia law and very strict enforcement of those revolutionary foundations. And then you have reformists like Khatami was, who advocate more economic liberalization, relaxed social rules, more international relations, opening up to international investment, things like that. Elite recruitment in Iran is interesting because it on the one hand, they want educated people, but they also want soldiers, and so that kind of narrows the field down to the people that come out of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard tend to be the ones who are most likely to move up the ranks. Because on the one hand, you do want them to be educated in Sharia law, but you also got to know that they are hardliners who have done their deeds in the government on behalf of the theocracy. And so the Revolutionary Guard Corps produces some, and also the Bajis, who we'll talk about shortly. In any authoritarian system, you're going to have a pretty mighty bureaucracy and most likely a strong military as well. And this is true in Iran. The supreme leader controls the state police, which is called the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. And they are very infamous for their crackdowns on anybody who's insubordinate to the state. We also have the Basij, which is more or less the secret service, or they might be described as kind of a youthful militant militia that goes around and does the extra dirty work. So, for example, these coercive channels go around and brutalize protesters, anybody who gets out of line, demonstrates publicly. In fact, they ambushed the British embassy at one point. And so they definitely instill fear in society, and they encourage the citizenry to stay in line and not make a spectacle of themselves. We also have the culture and propaganda ministries that attempt to control political popular culture and uprisings. And so these guys will go into the schools along with the groups like the Basij and make sure that, say, we're not talking about Western ideas in the schools, or that students aren't demonstrating Western ideals or any anti-state messages. But also things like regulating what kind of music and arts are allowable. Anybody who comes to the country is going to be monitored by the culture ministry to make sure that they are, say, only filming certain things, or that they're going to demonstrate the culture in a certain way that they want them to. So everything's very controlled as far as image and things that get talked about by the bureaucracy. And if you don't, then you're going to get cracked down by the coercive channels. The military, obviously, is a very important thing to mention with Iran, too, and especially in historical terms, because back in the 80s, they had the big war. Their big World War II moment was the Iran-Iraq War against Saddam Hussein. And 4 million soldiers served in the armed forces. And these are more or less considered the greatest generation, just like the United States views the World War II generation. They're heroes. There's memorials all over the place to the so-called war generation. Movies have been made about them. And it definitely serves both as a security measure and foreign policy measure, but also it's very much a part of a political culture and indoctrination, political socialization. how people are explained the sacrifice that the war generation made, and how everybody else should be equally devoted to the state and to the nation and to Islam and so on and so forth. The only thing we need to know about the judiciary of Iran is that all judges appointed by the leader, which means that makes them a rubber stamp as well, and they enforce Sharia law, which puts them in a very powerful position. Remember, religious law and civic law are the same thing in Iran. And so, everything from your punishment for running a red light to apostasy, which is violating your religion, is all going to be handled by judges, and they judge harshly. Very similar to what we saw in China. Lots of political prisoners, religious prisoners, people being executed left and right for a whole variety of things. Very rough and tough stuff in the Iranian judiciary. We have lots of non-associational groups. Here's where we see this term the most in Iran. Like bazaar merchants, the craftsmen and the shop owners who sell their products. They definitely have a voice. They're not organized. They're not what we would call an NGO, but they are sporadically will turn up and voice their interests. The war veterans we mentioned. Teachers actually have somewhat of a voice, and students occasionally will spontaneously demonstrate in Iran. So the name of the game for people voicing themselves is non-associational groups, because the government's going to clamp down on any NGOs that form. They would see them as a threat, but spontaneous uprisings and non-associational groups are more common. This is an authoritarian system, so obviously we've got patron-client networks where people are engaging in all kinds of relationships and actions to try to get themselves hooked up and get their needs met, bribery and whatnot. Demonstrations are common in Iran. You would think they would be non-existent given the brutality of the administration, but demonstrations are connected to the revolutionary tradition. Where people did rise up in 1979 against the Shah, and that has been hammered into their political and cultural consciences forever. And so it's natural for Iranians to demonstrate. In the 1990s, some women in student groups developed as well. Shirin Ebadi, for example, won the Nobel Prize for her work. We're still hearing about a lot of these efforts today to try to help women have more privileges and more powers in Iran. A lot of people are surprised to hear about how much women can do in Iran compared to other countries like Saudi Arabia, for example. Women are definitely more advanced as far as political participation in Iran than in most other Arab countries. The political culture is very rich in Iran, but at the same time it's contained. So there, again, the historical legacy of Iran, going all the way back to the days of the Persian Empire, has really empowered them, given them a sense of nationalism, which is another reason why we call Iran an Islamo-fascist regime. Historically, the West has meddled in Iranian affairs. They've never colonized them, and they've actually, controlled their, controlled their country on many occasions. But because of this, they've been indoctrinated to distrust foreigners and the investments that they try to bring. In other words, they're told Westerners only want to invest in Iran and take all of our stuff. They believe in conspiracy theories quite a bit, and so it makes sense when you bring all these elements together. Iranians are individualistic on one side, but they are also collectivist regarding social policy. So in other words, on some things they want to be left alone, but in other ways, when you ever have a firm government, they call for the government to help people to a degree. Iranians expect government to close the wealth gap with oil proceeds, but there's so much corruption in the government that never really happens. They also have a propensity to support charismatic leaders. Again, it makes sense. Twelver Shi'ism talks about this messianic figure that they are planning on coming at some point. The Ayatollah in the Iranian Revolution, even before that, the Shah, uplifted as the supreme divine right king. All of it points to this propensity amongst Iranians to kind of engage in the cult of personality for charismatic leaders, whoever they may be at that particular moment. Political socialization. So here's where we kind of talk about Twelver Shi'ism a little bit more. This is by far, and it's not even close, the most important thing that dictates Iranians' opinions about things. So the backstory is when Muhammad died, we're in the early days of Islam here, the community needed a successor. Shiites believe that only his true descendants, the imams, could lead. Sunnis believe that anybody who was a faithful Muslim could lead the community. And that break between Sunnis and Shiites has existed to this very day, and millions of people have been killed because of it. Shiites believe that the 12th Imam was the last and went to heaven or disappeared somehow and will return in the future. And that's why I refer to him as a messianic figure. And that's why the supreme leader says, in the meantime, until the Imam comes back, then I'm in charge and I am going to interpret the things that he wants me to do. But more often than not, Iranians are pledged to this religious devotion. They consider themselves more Muslim than they do Iranians. They'll refer to themselves that way. But of course, all their political opinions and beliefs and impulses are all vastly dictated by Twelver Shi'ism, for sure. Education also, it would be natural in an authoritarian system. Students are indoctrinated from day one with religious study, classes on the revolution, Arabic language training, history of Iran. They demonize Western ideals, like when the Americans and the British are assassinating their leader, stealing their oil, and whatever else they accuse them of doing. They even recite anti-Western chants in school. And so very much a well-polished indoctrination machine to make people think a certain way about politics. But again, like I said, it's getting tougher to do that with Western influences coming through the media and a younger generation that just does not hold the war generation and the revolution in quite the same high regard. In the universities, this is even more true, and they even play a little tougher there. The Supreme Council for Cultural Revolution at one time closed all the universities to clear them out of the Western sympathizers, very similar to what we saw with China. But in the universities, not only do you learn about subjects, you also learn about Islamic government ideas. And so, for example, if you're going to be a technocrat or an expert, you may study Islamic economics or Islamic science. And if you want to move up to the highest level and be one of these religious leaders, or at least a scholar, you go to one of the Qom seminaries that are in Iran that are the preferred institution of all the highest level ulemas and the supreme leader. The Bazij, as we mentioned before, is very instrumental in monitoring the behavior of students, and so they're kind of have elements of the SS that we saw with the Nazis, and they go into these places and clear out anybody they think is going to be a problem for the regime, and also send a message to everybody else that you better fall in line and remember who's boss around here. Same was true of the student uprisings that happened in 99 and 2003 as part of Khatami's revolution. Lastly, the family also is going to be a major socializer of political opinions. Remember, Dad was there for the revolution. Dad may very well have been in the war. And so he's going to try to indoctrinate his students to carry on that tradition of being faithful to the revolutionary days. It's getting harder and harder, but it's definitely still there. Let's take a look at political participation now. So a major result of the Iranian Revolution of '79 was an increase in citizen participation. In other words, it becomes kind of a tradition to be activist in Iran, and therefore you're kind of glorifying those days. Elections take place. This is an illiberal democracy, and so elections aren't really the voice of the people as much as it is the supreme leader in the state measuring legitimacy and stability. If people are turning out to vote, that means they're following the system put in place for them. It's not like they're being listened to. In fact, the elections themselves are usually fraudulent. Turnout is usually discussed more than results, which makes sense if you're talking about terms of measuring legitimacy. It's around 60%. Iranians are prone to youth demonstrations, again, kind of inspired by their traditions of the revolution. It's kind of like that here in the United States, too. You go to a place like UC Berkeley, where they have the tradition of the demonstration. They hear about and read about the demonstrations in the 60s, and so even younger generations feel the need or the obligation or the sense of duty to kind of replicate that. The civil society has been pretty limited. Again, we've learned this rule by now that in an authoritarian state, especially a long-lasting one, that you're not going to have too much of a civil society. In previous eras in Iran, they may have had a stronger civil society. There definitely is a sense of national pride there. Again, we're talking about people who revere their Persian traditions. They've never been colonized by the West. And the Tehran Spring that happened during Khatami's administration also is another one of these hints that there's a civil society that's there, just not always visible. Maybe that's a better way to explain it. But the civil society bubbles more from the younger people than it does the older people. Remember, the older people lived through the Iran-Iraq War. They lived through the Iranian Revolution. They remember the days of the Westerners taking their oil, and so they're a little more connected to those things that have been indoctrinated by the state and told by the state these are important things. The younger generation doesn't necessarily embody those things, and so with a massively huge young population, that may explode later. We've already seen hints of that in election result demonstrations. But enough times of the state and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard cracking down on demonstrators, people are going to think twice about it. So what's going to be the result? It's kind of difficult to know, but there definitely is the possibility that the civil society in Iran will explode someday, and it's there now. It's just kind of veiled at this point. And you're going to recall there's a lot of nationalism in Iran. In fact, Iran means Aryan, love for your type of people. It's quasi-fascist, in fact, and so that alone tells us that there's something organic within the people in the civil society. The media is controlled by the government, as you'd expect. That wouldn't be an authoritarian regime without it. And the leader can even appoint the heads of the radio and television media outlets. However, many Iranians are exposed to foreign outlets. They're watching CNN, BBC on satellite, and of course all the social media stuff as well. This is bypassing the indoctrination channels that we see ran by the government, and people are getting Western ideas in different ways. A growing number of independent and critical newspapers are appearing, but this is going to wind you up in prison a lot of times and maybe even executed as a political dissident if you go too far. Happens all the time. Since 2000, the regime has cracked down on many of these print outlets, and you never hear from them again if they go too far and get dealt with. However, everybody knows who they are, and when they do vanish, you know what happens to them, and that makes them martyrs. And a lot of times, these are the newest heroes of the youth who are trying to break through this wall of power that originated in 1979. The cleavages in Iran are real simple. The reformists are trying to break down that wall set up by the conservatives. Now, the reformists, don't get me wrong, it's not like these are leftist European-style people. They would still be considered very conservative and very old-fashioned to the Westerner, but they are less so than the conservatives on the other side. And then you got the old versus young, and this would be your go-to one to mention. Old versus young, the war generation, the revolutionary generation, versus the young people who are slowly but surely being influenced by the seeping Westernism that's coming into Iran. Lots of social movements, revolutions, coups. I mean, this is the place to go if you like that kind of stuff. So go back to 1921. There was a coup d'etat that brought the dictator Reza Khan to power, and then he was promptly ousted by the Allies during World War II for not being someone that they could count on. And so after the war, they installed Reza Pahlavi, which called for a white revolution or a pro-American, pro-Western movement that included Western suffrage. Women weren't wearing head coverings anymore. They were allowed to be exposed to Western entertainment and culture a lot more. And of course, the reason he did that is because he was getting his pockets lined by the Westerners. He was letting them have access to Iranian oil that made him rich. He really lived it up and was very brutal toward people that were opposed to him. Now, make no mistake about it, he was the best friend the West ever had in Iran, but a lot of people didn't care for him selling out to them. And so this all fermented throughout the 60s and 70s until the Islamic Revolution occurred in 1979. And at that point, he was overthrown right around the same time as he was exiled to the United States, and where he also was receiving cancer treatment. This guy, Ayatollah Khomeini, rose to power and became the face as the first supreme leader of the revolutionary era. And so chaos ensues. You get the Iran hostage crisis and all that was packaged in. 10 years later, the ulemas issue a new constitution to try to make themselves look a little more democratic, realizing to give themselves a little more external legitimacy, they needed to do that. But, truly they were still very hardline Islamic. The Iran-Iraq War was another major moment, as we've talked about, he used this war to build national unity. He had done the revolution, the ideological revolution, to put themselves in power, but now they needed to rally the country around it, and he used that war to rally nationally, but also to give himself more power in terms of, I will guide you through this, and we'll get to the promised land together, so to speak. Of course, the war generation still dominates politics to this very day. Many major moments in that stretch of time for Iran in the 70s, 80s, and all the way up to today. It's still very much a player in global affairs, very much a foreign policy concern for the West, including the United States. Like every other country we reviewed, Iran has some major policy challenges. So as far as social policy goes, they've got lots of things that we Westerners would make us consider them to be kind of backwards and behind the times. So alcohol and music ban, veiling of women is enforced, punishments for adulterers, homosexuals, and offenders of religious law are very harshly punished, a lot of times by death. It's no secret there. To the state, Islamicization has been a huge success. They believe themselves to be a country that is governed by God and where they are faithful servants of God. The attendance in the mosques has increased. Public prayer is very routine. They got the sirens that go off at the prayer times, and everybody stops what they're doing and does it. As far as people playing that game and being devoted to it, no doubt about it, has this whole thing been a success. But it's also the things that are implemented in order to maintain that place a struggle on cultural development or economic development. They got a lot of problems too, though. Prostitution is prevalent. Millions are drug addicts. In Iran, as part of Sharia law, you can't drink alcohol, but perhaps it's more vague about drug addiction. There's plenty of drug addicts. Bootleggers, corruption, all this is very common, as is in every authoritarian regime. Under the Shah, Western attitudes toward women prevailed, which revolutionaries saw as conducive to moral corruption. In other words, you want to have people be faithful and pure in their religious devotion, and women running around in Western outfits showing too much skin was not going to help that. Now, with that said, women, again, do have more privileges and rights in Iran than women in other Islamic countries. But still, to the West, this would be a social problem that needs to be addressed. Economic policy challenges are plentiful as well. Rural development, very slow. You have vast swaths of the country that are completely undeveloped. Health, women's education, roads lag behind that of the West. Entrepreneurs are seen as corrupt. Again, entrepreneurism is capitalist Western stuff, and we know that they see Westerners with a suspect eye, and so therefore anybody who wants to be an entrepreneur is seen as having an alternative agenda. So investment is very low, even at the global level. It's very low. Population grows by 1 million every year, and 60% of the population is under the age of 25. And therefore, unemployment is very high. 27% are around there. Thousands get their degrees from an education system that is not too bad at all, but they have no opportunities after that, and so they're moving to the West in bigger numbers every year. The rentier state, obviously, a major economic pitfall. Oil exports, when they're good, they provide a windfall profit, big influx of money into the treasury. But when times are bad, that's not there, and they don't have a tax system in place to kind of guard against that. And also, they have limited revenue to play with, which means they're not going to be able to respond to social demands for some kind of social safety net. The resource curse alive and well in Iran. It's in foreign policy where we perhaps see the biggest challenges for Iran. Just like with China, the whole foreign policy thing in Iran is mainly based on the national interest. They only engage as much as is going to promote the national interest, and they also shield themselves from anything that's going to injure the national interest. Problem is there's little consensus about how that should look. For example, the whole international investment thing. Should we allow foreigners to come in and invest and develop our industry? Others will say, no, you can't do that because that's going to have them get a foothold and control us and all that. But there's lots of things. I mean, for example, they're so isolated that a lot of people call for a need to create greater alliances with other Muslim nations, both Shiite and Sunni nations. But there's little consensus about that because there's so much religious tension connected to that. Israel is another major issue. They spend a lot of time threatening to wipe Israel off the map, which is a quote from their own former president, Ahmadinejad. But the problem is that Israel is stronger militarily and they can defend themselves quite efficiently from Iran. And in fact, Israel has repeatedly attacked locations that they deem to be a threat from Iran, nuclear development facilities, for example. And so there's things like that. Why devote so much energy to eliminating Israel? And the answer is obviously it's old grudges, it's religious, but it's also political and economic and other factors. But the biggest thing of all is Iran trying to develop a nuclear weapon. And a lot of, the whole world wants to prevent that from happening. And the reason why they're not allowed to have one, a lot of people don't understand this, and they signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty in 1968, where many nations who were considered third world countries, we didn't want them to have their hands on nukes. And Iran was one of them, and they got perks out of the deal for not pursuing these things. You can enrich uranium, but you can't do it for weapons-grade uranium. And so because of that, we've installed all these channels, mainly through the UN's atomic watchdog, which is the IAEA. And so they're always suspecting violations, which have been proven to be true, and that's why the United States, Israel, and others have attacked those installations before. And so you kind of bring all this together, and it kind of climaxed at this big moment in 2006 when the United States spearheaded a global effort to make some kind of pact with Iran to where they would vow not to develop nuclear weapons in exchange for the lifting of the harsh economic sanctions that have been placed on them for several years up to that point. And it was a very weak deal in that there's very little to force Iran not to pursue that those nuclear weapons. They were doing it secretly anyways, and in exchange, it opens up investment for Westerners and foreigners, and so a lot of people have dollars in their eyes as for Iran to be this big cash grab. But who knows if Iran will even cooperate with that, and there's really no guarantees. And so that's kind of where we stand with Iran. It's still isolated, maybe coming out of that. We'll see how things come down the path, but a lot of tension around the world with what everybody has always feared since the beginning of the Cold War, which is that some rogue state is going to get their hands on a nuke, and Iran will be the one that may make that happen down the road.